Before I jump into today's topic, which is ADHD and things I think you should consider when you're wondering whether you should treat ADHD or not, either in yourself or in somebody you care for, I'd like to cover a couple of topics first. Number one is, I'm really happy to say that I find sharing content on YouTube to be really rewarding. I've always enjoyed the patient engagement portion of being a medical provider more than any other part of healthcare. And so it wasn't entirely clear to me whether sharing content on a format like YouTube or in a format like this would be equally satisfying. I'm really happy to say that I like it quite a bit, and I hope to get on a schedule of producing content that's pretty routine. And also I'd like to say I've enjoyed connecting with all of the good mental health and brain science content that's available on formats like YouTube. And I've had a few weeks to consider where my content might fit in. At this point in my journey and working on providing content, it feels like adding a clinical perspective that takes into account all of that good scientific knowledge that's emerging out there and putting it into a format that makes it more accessible for you to weigh decision-making and weigh opportunities for addressing mental health issues more successfully. And I really hope that's of use. Please, any comments about that, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So now back to the question of what factors might need to be considered when you're wondering about whether to treat ADHD or not. Now, I'd like to be clear, I don't intend this to be a discussion about medications and their side effects, the pros and cons about specific treatment decisions. I'd like to address those issues at some point in time as well, but today I really want to have a general discussion about weighing whether treatment for ADHD is a good fit generally. And I really think that discussion boils down to three primary areas of brain functioning that relate right to the point of ADHD. The first of those issues has to do with timing and how our brain changes with time. The general concept is brain plasticity, how our brain adapts, how it supports the creation of different brain pathways, and how it maintains those pathways, especially over time and through the process of development. And then the next two factors I think should be considered fall under the category of development, but they're uniquely different. The first area of development I'd like to focus on is especially around the area of cognitive development and skill building. Those areas are critical to the development of who we are as people and the direction our life takes. And then the last area I'd like to cover also has to do with development, but it's its own specific area, and that has to do with social skills and the development of relationships. Now, taking each one of those one at a time. The first area, brain plasticity, is a really complicated area of neuroscience and neurodevelopment, and I really want to just focus it down into the areas that relate right to ADHD so that we don't overcomplicate the point. In the process of development, there'll be hundreds, if not thousands, of tasks a child has to learn to do well to move successfully into adulthood. If you think all of the tasks we do every day, they're financial, they're home-related, there's work-related, there's social tasks. Those taken together are a lot of homework for somebody to get through. Now bringing in the concept of focus, which is basically at the heart of ADHD, the lack of the ability to create enough focus to the point that it creates a serious amount of functional impairment in somebody's life. So I think you can see where this is going. If you have all of this work to get done in development around cognitive skills that take all kinds of forms, and you don't have enough focus to actually spend enough time on those tasks to help that brain plasticity, lay down those brain tracks to develop them and then to maintain them, it really seems like we're setting people up to enter life without the ability to take care of the basics of what it is to be what they want to be. And when we speak about brain plasticity, we talk about it in terms of windows, and it's not 100% correct. There's a lot of brain plasticity throughout the entire lifespan, but there are specific times when brain plasticity is especially active. In brain creation from birth to a couple of years, and then throughout those first 10 to 15 years of life when all of that development is kind of hyper accelerated. So one concern you might have about untreated ADHD is that you might be missing that window of hyper accelerated brain plasticity, leaving somebody without all of the benefit of learned information early in life. Moving into young adulthood, the issue is probably a little less urgent, but it's still there in some form. There is a lot of brain plasticity that's still available to lay down those developmental tracks. We see this all the time in young adults who missed some windows for development and they have to play a little catch up. It is a little more challenging than when people are younger, but it's better to build those skills as young as you possibly can, even if that means young adulthood. So brain plasticity, one of the factors that I think should be considered when weighing whether to treat ADHD or not, provides a sort of time context, or maybe even a sense of urgency to catch some of those brain plasticity hyper-accelerated windows that occur early in life and help us develop at a rate that really creates the essence of who we are. And in the discussion of brain plasticity, we were talking about all of those little tasks that are necessary using those brain pathways to create the skills that we need to move into what we want to do with our lives, basically. Which brings us to a second point that I think needs to be weighed when you're looking at whether or not to treat ADHD, and I like to call this one life development. You could say that life development is what's created when you start to take all of those little tasks that we learn and you start putting them into context. Things like hobbies, interests, education, occupation. They start to take form and they provide us a sense of identity, a sense of who we are, a sense of what we'd like to become, and they create something of a pathway for the creation of the kind of life that you'd like to live. So in a sense, these small pathways become the building blocks of larger domains of self-development, the development essentially of who we are. So one concern might be without enough of these building blocks, we may not be entirely sure of what we want out of life, what we like, what our aspirations are, what our goals are. So we might be leaving some really core elements of opportunity kind of unexplored. And then that third factor to consider, the social context of all of this. One of the most painful elements of ADHD for many people is the difficulty creating and then maintaining social relationships. The first element of this is that creating and maintaining relationships requires a certain amount of focus, and if you add to that maybe some deficits in that area of life development, with maybe a lack of hobbies or a lack of occupational skill, then we can really start to see where somebody with ADHD might even be set up to have some social or relationship challenges. Now, I'll be the first to acknowledge that this discussion around ADHD goes beyond basic science. It's really basic science, including things like brain plasticity, added in with what we see from people in basic development of personality, skill, hobby, interest, occupation, and how those elements impact in occupation, how they impact on relationship, and how they impact on overall life satisfaction through time. So the way I would be weighing whether to treat ADHD or not is I would be looking at myself or somebody I care for, and I would be considering those three elements and how they're affecting the individual. I would be looking at how they're doing with skill building with an eye towards whether they're developing those skills or not. I'd be looking at overall life development and what that looks like. And then I'd be looking at relationships and whether they're developing the kinds of relationships that would be satisfying for them in the context of their life, in developing in the way that best suits them. And if in looking at those three areas I had serious concerns, then I would be pretty motivated to treat that ADHD. Again, please keep in mind that making a decision like treating or not treating ADHD is a very important decision, and it shouldn't be done in isolation, so please bring this kind of information up for discussion with your healthcare provider, with your treatment team, and weigh all of the pros and cons and make the decision that's right for you. Thank you so much for joining me on this video. If you found the content useful, please give it a thumbs up. That helps with the algorithm. And if you like the content generally, I plan to be posting routinely. Please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you here.